Welcome in, everybody. Thank you so much for joining me here on Cream of the Crop, a fantasy hockey podcast presented by Apples and Ginos. I am Blake Creamer, your host. Please follow me over on X/Twitter at Blake Creamer AG. And I want to get to business right away today because I got a very special guest. He's a hockey consultant, former AHL coach, and NHL analyst. I got Jack Hahn here, buddy. How you doing? Thanks so much for joining us.
No problem, Blake. Looking forward to talking a little fantasy hockey.
My man, yeah, I've heard this about you, Jack. You're a fantasy hockey savant. Is that accurate?
That is not so.
Not
Actually,
accurate at all. Yeah,
no,
salacious.
I'll give you a little backstory. So I'm 35 years old, and like I've been working hockey in various capacities for a while. Started coaching when I was 18, but the main sort of experience I've had with fantasy was on like the old Yahoo fantasy hockey, like kind of the leagues. Uh, when I was in college, a group of friends and we had like a kind of a private league that we would run, and I was part of that for a couple of years, like around like 2008, 2009. Lots of anxiety about setting lineups and like trolling the waiver wire, stuff like that. Um, and it ended up just like school and real life became, more important to me than just finding the perfect like third goalie, that kind of thing. So
Yeah.
so uh I haven't really played fantasy hockey since then, like certainly not while I was working professional hockey, because there are enough real life sort of consequent things that you got to worry about with real life players, that again, like, you're not going to have time to set your lineups, so why even bother?
Yeah, it's so true. I was thinking too, like, why play fantasy hockey when you can be involved in real hockey? Oh man, I mean that's ideal. And then fantasy maybe one level down.
Yeah, and the other thing is, it's like, so um I work in a variety of roles, whether it's on coaching on the ice, whether it's video analysis, whether it's more the analytics. And even though I think I know a lot about hockey and I know a lot about like how things go on the inside, like fantasy hockey is another thing. Like, just because you really know hockey, like the game, doesn't necessarily mean that you'll be all that competitive in fantasy hockey. In fact, uh, you know, the best fantasy hockey players, they have terrible opinions about hockey, at least the ones I know. So
Yeah, you think of things so differently. Hey, like I find myself having to stop myself from kind of just treating these guys like they're numbers. You know what I mean? These guys are players and they have things going on in their lives and things that affect them. You know what I mean? So it's interesting, even like a situation with like Val Nichushkin or something like that. Like this guy was a fantasy stud, but yeah, he's got some problems that he needs to deal with. So when things like that happen, you're like, it kind of just puts things in perspective a little bit because I can get pretty deep down this rabbit hole of fantasy. That's for
yeah,
sure.
yeah, but even like, some of the numbers, or the stats that I would care about as a coach, if you use sort of, if you say, okay, well, this is a good player because, let's say, he gets the puck out of the zone and he makes good defensive plays, but this player gets, like, I don't know, 20 points a season, like, he's going to be a terrible fantasy pickup, right?
Yeah.
So, well, and vice versa. There's a bunch of guys who get a lot of sort of empty calorie points, or they pile up hits or block shots, or and in real life, you're not really interested in these players, but in a fantasy context, they're really useful. So again, real hockey and fantasy hockey, like, they're both sort of, they're sort of related, but they're
Yeah.
actually not.
Well, I mean, the good thing is, like, obviously with fantasy hockey, we're looking at offense, that we're looking at point production. And that's something that obviously is a part of real hockey. But then, like you said, there's those players that have massive value. Guys like Chris Tanev, actually, who just went down in the Dallas Oilers game. What the hell? But yeah, massively valuable player, but no one's picking him up for fantasy. Why would you? Right. So, but for me, like, thank you so much for being here, because I've found that, like, the deeper I get into this stuff, the more I learn about what I don't know. Right. And I want to dig in on the why. That's something that kind of drives me just to have this podcast in the first place, understand why players perform the way they do. And I know that our listeners do too. And that's why I'm just excited to have you on, my man, because just to sort of help fill in those gaps just due to your experience.
Sure. So I know you've got lots of questions. The show notes are very comprehensive. So let's get started.
Yeah, I have a problem. Um, yeah, all right. Well, let's get into it. So, speaking of the Oilers and Dallas series here, I just wanted to get your thoughts. First off, on the conference finals, because I listened to your podcast there that you did on the PDO cast with Dimitri, which was great. The bunch of episodes that you did, kind of previewing these different rounds. And is there anything that sort of surprised you in terms of player performances or coaching decisions, just from watching these two series here?
I I I I wouldn't say so much it's surprising, but it's just so you think of just being in a Final Four situation in the postseason. Uh, the teams are very evenly matched, but
Hmm.
then if we're watching Dallas Edmonton for instance, you have teams coming out gangbusters. They score a couple of goals. They're leading heavily in shots. All of a sudden, it flips. The other team catches up. Now they're leading shots. So like that's the thing that I've always had trouble with in terms of whether it's fantasy sports or sports betting in a hockey context. And like I don't bet on sports.
Hmm.
And I would especially sort of caution people from betting on hockey just because there's so much randomness. And even if you have two teams which are, if you look at any model, right, like Dom decision or whatever, like 54 percent odds of winning is actually not that much better than coin flip, right? And like hockey is just it's a long series of coin flips, so it's really hard to predict. And whether it is New York getting heavily outshot by Florida but still having the series tied, whether it's this crazy sort of back and forth lead changes in Dallas and Edmonton, it's it's a terrible thing if you're a better or if you're someone who plays fantasy hockey, just because like it's so hard to get a bearing on what's going on. Um, and the thing that I would sort of say about betting, because we talked about before we start recording, is um, in hockey it's especially difficult because of the variance. And if you're someone who's just sort of putting money on the game for fun and you're just sort of this small retail bettor, it's really difficult because you don't have a huge bankroll. You can't afford a lot of variance. Um, you like, even if you find a legitimate edge, maybe it's a couple percentage points. It really doesn't move the needle for you. So it's like, again, I wouldn't recommend anybody bet on hockey, but if you do, just realize that first of all, knowing more about the game doesn't necessarily constitute enough of an edge. I certainly would have no confidence, even though I think I know hockey pretty well, in terms of having any sort of an edge. But also, just like the crazy variance that you see makes it a really hard game to bet on.
Yep. No, that's so true. And it's a really interesting point too. Like, one thing I try and, say here on the podcast, and what we're trying to do with our show here, is kind of just put things on our side, right? Because like you said, at the end of the day, the variance is insane. Right. These guys are like 220-pound guys, like flying around with a little rubber puck. Like, what the hell, and we're trying to extrapolate what we think is going to happen, and that's just looking at the analytics. Like, the mental side on top of that, we have no clue what's going on there. And even if we did, could we do anything with it? I mean, probably not, so I totally get what you're saying there. I don't know, something I love about fantasy hockey too is the game within the game. Like, I don't know about the league you used to play in, but we do a lot of streaming, like, so dropping players off your roster, bringing another player in. And that's like a game within a game a little bit, where you're kind of suffocating your opponent with games played. So there's certain type of edges that you can get here. But yeah, I absolutely agree with what you're saying. I'm basically just trying to round out my skill set and our listener skill set as much as possible, so we could put everything on our side and then just fail miserably at the end. Yeah, that's probably what's going to happen.
Okay, so the one, I guess I'll lead off with my top tip, if if you're a fantasy hockey player, is when you look at the NHL in terms of fantasy value. For me, the number one factor is opportunity, right? Because we're mostly talking about points, but also about block shots and sort of hits, or some of those, depending on what kind of league you play in, obviously. But
Yep.
a lot of those stats, uh, are obviously driven by the inherent quality of the player, but the second most important factor is how much opportunity they get. So, is this player on the first power play? Well, that means that they're probably going to pile up assists and goals and shots, especially if they play on a team with a good power play, which I guess we can get into a little bit later when we get more into the X's and O's. Or if this player is a regular penalty killer, well, there's a good chance that he's going to get more block shots, maybe hits, but certainly block shots. And it kind of works out in real life too, where you see certain players with sort of very not average skill sets, but just they're just a run of the mill player, but then they wind up on the right line, they find the right D partner, the coach just likes them for whatever reason, or conversely, the coach just refuses to play them. And you can have two players with very similar qualities with tremendously different production. So I would say if you're a fantasy player, if you get really good at sussing out and understanding what leads to opportunities and what teams maybe confer certain opportunities to certain types of players, then that's certainly an edge that you can exploit.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm glad you brought that up because that's something that I sort of preach here a little bit. There's kind of three things that I look at. Time on ice being one of them. So actual deployment, opportunity, like you mentioned. So where they are up the lineup, and then the metrics underneath. And here at Apples and Ginos, we use rate stats at 5-on-5. So like shots on goal per 60, individual Corsi 4 per 60, and then individual scoring chances 4 per 60. Plus like the luck metrics, we call them the luck metrics: IPP, shooting percentage, on ice shooting percentage. That's sort of how we, create the bones of a fantasy player. And then, both my partner and I, we do projections every year and release those to the public. And we actually just did an episode where we went over those projections, and it went fairly well, right? That's kind of a nice exercise. It's more for us than it is for our listeners. But yeah, I'm glad you brought up opportunity, because that is definitely how you sort of get an edge. But sometimes you just have to jump on a player, right?
Yeah, and okay, so obviously, at the top of the list is how good the player actually is, and then second is opportunity, and then third, I would say is I remember back when I played fantasy hockey, like the player pool, the human player pool that you're competing against, like the other GMs in the league. I think that's probably the third factor, because depending on how sort of they consume hockey, or what their kind of biases are, or what kind of players that they like or that they look for, there are certain things that you can exploit. So, for instance, you mentioned all the rate stats, right? The possession stats, the luck-based stats, and well, what ends up happening is a lot of sort of the new school, very kind of stats-minded fans, they overvalue Corsi, because of course you're looking to get good players, and good players in real life, they tend to be able to drive play, but that doesn't mean that they're actually going to be able to put up points. Like for instance, a player that I coach who's a real good player, and I'm a big fan of, Pierre Engvall. Okay, so Pierre Engvall drives play. He's a big dude, skates really well, defensively solid. He can play center or wing. He doesn't put up a lot of points, right? Like he does a lot of the heavy lifting in terms of carrying the puck, but he's not going to put up a ton of empty calorie points, because he doesn't necessarily get on the power play. He doesn't shoot the puck in the net at a super high rate. He doesn't put up a lot of assists, whether it's primary or secondary. So, but if you're someone who is really, cares about play driving, cares about like war, like wins above replacement, he's a good player. But in a fantasy context, maybe not so valuable. So if you're in a league with a lot of GMs who are heavily into sort of the possession, or goals, or above replacement, uh, maybe you can go and exploit them by getting some of these like empty calorie uh, scorers, or maybe guys who put up a lot of hits, or maybe guys who block shots. Um, Conversely, if you're playing against GMs who are all about like the box scores,
Mm-hmm.
then maybe you can identify a guy who drives play, who's bound to move up in the lineup, who's got a low IPP, who's got a abnormally low shooting percentage. So again, like it's as much about what players to go after than what kind of biases that your human opponents have.
Yeah, no, that's so true, and it's a really good point. Um, in your experience, like, you know, how do you value players, or how do you have any metrics that you like to look at to help predict player performance? Like, when you're looking at a player that may break out, or someone who's running hot that's not sustainable, or conversely, someone who's ice cold, but everything under the hood looks good.
Okay, well, I mean, you seem to have a really good handle on the more the advanced statistics that are very sort of more mainstream in hockey now. And this is not to say that my stuff works in a fantasy hockey context, because again, I'm not really a fantasy hockey player. But one sort of kind of stupid simple stat that I like a lot with the players I work with in a development context, so whether it's junior players, whether it's college players, pro players, is how many times they touch the puck per game. Or if you prefer rate stats, it could be per hour on the ice. And the reason is that the best players, they tend to touch the puck more often. So if you're talking about a McDavid or a McKinnon or an Austin Matthews, they're touching the puck about once every 20 to 25 seconds when they're on the ice, which is actually not a lot, because if you think about it, like the average shift is maybe 40, 45 seconds. So
Right.
if you're averaging 2 puck touches per shift, which that actually works out to be a lot. And you're not going to get two per shift. Sometimes you'll get one, sometimes you get zero, other times you'll get four in the same shift. And but what happens is the like it's a high frequency stat. So if you're an offensive minded player, you're going to touch the puck 25, 30, 35, 45 times a game. And uh conversely, if you're a player who's maybe just on a hot streak, you might touch it 15 times a game, but then three of them go in the net. And there's an element of that that's not really repeatable. Whereas if you're a player who's, again, touching the puck at a very high frequency, maybe it's not going in now, um, but it will start going in eventually. Or if you have a young player who's a call up, who you can actually maybe watch the first one or two games and manually track these stats. Let's say it's a Logan Stankoven or Maverick Bork, who maybe draws in at some point in this playoffs, and maybe he plays 10 minutes, but you see that within these 10 minutes he's touching the puck 20, 23, 25 times. There's really something there, because in a larger sample size, the number of puck touches really don't lie. The players who touch the puck more often, they have sort of more influence on the game. They can really put their fingerprint on the game in terms of how it's played. Uh, and ultimately, if you're looking for players who are consistent point producers, these are the guys who not only touch the puck often, but do something with it. But the frequency part, I think it's easy to gloss over, because you basically can't look at a player and say, oh, well, he touches the puck once every 30 seconds and the other guy touches it once every 45 seconds. You just can't make that judgment. Just like you can't really watch three shifts of a guy and know whether he's a 20 or 40 goal scorer. You're
Right.
gonna have to watch more.
Yeah. You know what that reminds me of? Because I play fantasy basketball as well, is usage. Like,
Mhm.
is that tracked anywhere? Or is that something you just manually tracking, like when you watch games and things like that?
No, well, so yeah, so I'm giving you this edge because it's not a stat that you're going to find anywhere.
Right.
This is a stat that I would say insiders use, because in a coaching context, it's really really useful. But you will not see this on any public outlets. So if you're a fan of actually watching the game and really doing the
Yeah.
work, and maybe you work at a job that's not overly demanding, you got a lot of free time at your desk, uh, and if you want to get an edge in your fantasy hockey, then I would suggest sort of strategically picking out different players, and then whether it's finding their shift or finding a full game, doing some of that legwork and see where that takes you.
I love that, man. There you go. Insider information. That's what we're looking for here. Yeah, no, that makes total sense too. And I mean, I play hockey as well. And like, when you're touching the puck a lot, like you're feeling it, right? Obviously, your teammates know you're going. The coach has confidence in you, right? So it just, yeah, that makes total sense. So I'm gonna give that a whirl, my man, because yeah, like I do a buy low, sell high show during the year, like once every couple weeks. So I just like look at, let's say, 6 players or something like that, and just see, hey, these guys should be doing better, these guys should be doing worse, and I dive in under the hood. But I'm gonna add that to the repertoire and just kind of see what's what, right? Because that's pretty interesting. Cool. Oh, thanks for that, my man. One thing I really want to touch base on while I've got you here, and something that does really affect the fantasy value of players moving forward, is a change in coach for these new teams. And we've had some doozies. It's been a crazy year, in terms of coach turnover. Very incestuous, isn't it? Everybody's just going to the other teams. What the hell's going on? But one thing I wanted to do, because this is your realm, is I was wondering if you could just talk to me a little bit about the recent coaching changes, and just, I have certain teams in particular that I'd love to get your thoughts on, if you're good to go with that.
Sure. So obviously, the NHL coaching circle is it's a fairly closed loop. And the thing is if you compare hockey to sports like soccer, for instance, there's a much smaller range of tactical sort of options that you have, just because you have 5 skaters and 1 goalie, whereas in soccer you have 11 outfield players and 1 keeper, right? So the sort of the geometric alignments, or the arrangements in hockey, it's not as complex as it is in soccer, and it's relatively difficult to watch team A and say with any confidence, oh, well, this is a Pep Guardiola team, and this other team is
Right.
a Jurgen Klopp team. The philosophy, certainly there are different philosophies, right? You can probably tell whether it's the Carolina Hurricanes or the New York Rangers, or you can tell whether it's, I don't know, the Vancouver Canucks, or Dallas Stars. Um, but it's like, just like different shades of gray. So the biggest, I would say, the biggest impact concretely that a coach has is in terms of feedback and lineup decisions. And basically, I would boil it down to, uh, what does the coach do when you screw up, or what does the coach do when things don't go well, or what does the coach do when this young or inexperienced, or player who's not established turns the puck over.
Mm-hmm.
Do they get benched and the coach goes back to the vets or the players that he quote unquote can trust? Or is his coach more willing to stick with a player who has shown a history of production at the lower levels, and therefore is more projectable, right? And there's no right or wrong answer, because obviously, there's a saying by Micah Blake McCurdy, which is, uh, I'll paraphrase, but he would rather see teams play players who they don't know whether are good or bad, rather than establish players who they know for sure are bad. But
Yeah.
but it's just like, it's 2 different philosophies, right? Like,
Yeah.
do you go for the sure thing that's maybe subpar, or do you go with the unknown, which can turn out either way? And I think that's the biggest difference between NHL coaches. It's not so much the tactics. It's not so much how they run a power play, because power plays are by and large pretty similar at this point. It's more like, how easily can young players break in? Um, players who have very sort of definite strength and weaknesses. How difficult it is for them to move up the lineup to get opportunities. And I would say those factors trump the tactical choices of a coach, because again, in hockey, it's a fast game. It's very instinctual. It's very sort of player centric. So again, you're not going to necessarily be able to uh, pick out sort of different tactical philosophies, and how well or how poorly a player produces across teams or across coaches is, again, more of a factor of opportunity rather than like the actual tactics.
Yeah. That makes total sense. It's because there is different tactics though, but yeah, you're right. Like, um, and I'm an educator as my, my regular job, and something that we try and do is normalize mistakes, right? Like when people make mistakes, you have to normalize that, right? Because something good comes of it. But it's interesting in, professional hockey, right? We don't always see that. You see, like you mentioned, a guy getting stapled to the bench because he makes a bad play or he takes a bad penalty, and that's it for the game. Like I think about a guy like Trevor Zegras this year, like just he was getting publicly benched and sort of embarrassed by his new coach there, Greg Cronin. And I always wonder what goes on, behind closed doors and the conversations that are being had. Like, how are they pumping this guy up? And that sort of leads me to another question: is like, in the NHL, do you think that coaches are leaning more towards this kind of, like pumping their players' tires a little bit, or normalizing mistakes a little more than kind of that old school mentality like that used to kind of run the NHL?
So I'll use the Zegras example, and I had a conversation with someone who works in pro hockey about Zegras, and neither of us knew anything specifics, but it was just a player who we talked about because, as you mentioned, he's struggling, right? He didn't have the best season. He didn't seem to be kind of in a good place. And like I did a very sort of brief study on Zegras a while back, and it goes back to what I said before. Like it doesn't matter why he's not touching the puck.
Hmm.
Is it because he was playing more on the wing and he's not comfortable there, and it's less of a as a player who's not overly strong, playing along the boards is not his forte. Whatever the reason is, it doesn't matter. If you like in the games that I saw, he touched the puck maybe 15, 17 times, which is way too low for a player with his style and with his sort of skill set. Um, so again, like if you're a fantasy hockey GM, you don't need to get too much in the weeds of like what's going on in the locker room, what's going on with this guy. Just watch the game. He's not getting the puck, he's not making plays, and therefore he's not putting in points. I don't think you need to go much farther than that.
Right. Yeah, no, that's interesting for sure. Yeah, like I love this kind of talk. And part of one of the reasons I wanted to have you on here as well is like, is that tactical part, like, and in particular, like Sheldon Keefe, who you actually worked with, right? And now he goes from Toronto to New Jersey. What does that do? Like, the mental part aside and how he's normalizing tactically, because his style going from Toronto, which was correct me if I'm wrong, but more of like kind of a cycle forecheck team, you've said is like a downhill attack team, going to New Jersey, which is like, they're one of the best rush teams in the league in terms of getting shots and chances off the rush, but they have an issue kind of getting that extended zone time. So how tactically is that going to change the New Jersey Devils when Keefe goes over there? Is he going to continue on with that rush play? Like when you have guys like Jack Hughes and Jesper Bratt like popping off, and these guys are elite at what they do, is he going to complement them, or are they going to kind of adapt to Keefe's style?
Well, I mean, I personally think that the core players for the Devils should have good seasons under Keefe, just because I think there's a better organizational buy-in in terms of, again, doubling down on the offensive side of the game and just being more well-rounded offensively without losing that rush game. I thought the last couple of years in Toronto, they kind of went too far the other way in terms of just playing like a dump and chase kind of muck it up team,
Yep.
where they try to win the Matthews and Marner minutes and then just play for a zero
Yeah.
zero tie the rest of the time, which ended up being their downfall because when their top guys couldn't score, nobody else could score either. And I think for the Devils, I think first of all, I think Sheldon is going to take some lessons for that. Plus, the core players for Devils, they're the kind of players who want to make plays and create speed
Yeah.
off the rush anyway. So it's not like you're going to go against that, because that would be a stupid thing to do. And the other thing that's really interesting about the Devils is that their defensemen are by and large, very mobile. They jump into the play. They have good hockey sense. So they're able to complement the forwards and get the puck into their hands on a higher frequency. So again, we talk about puck touches, right? Well, like when you play again with good defensemen as a forward, you're getting more puck touches because they're turning pucks over, they're making stops defensively, they're breaking the puck out cleanly, they're finding the middle of the ice, they're able to keep pucks in, move on the blue line, stuff like that. So I'm just looking at Jack Hughes's scoring. So he had 99 points in 78 games two seasons ago, and 74 in 62 last season. So obviously, health was a bit of an issue, but I would expect him, health permitting, to be back sort of in that 80, 90, 100 point range, perhaps. Same with Brad, and we'll see if Dougie Hamilton comes back fully healthy. He's a pretty sure thing in terms of being on the power play, getting a lot of these assists, shooting the puck in the net once in a while. Like anytime you can crack double digits as a defenseman, like that's pretty good. Um, yeah, like Sheldon is going to play the best players a ton. They're going to give these players a ton of opportunities. I don't think there's going to be a ton of sort of second guessing or sending a message by stapling players to the bench. So I mean, again, I could be totally wrong, but it seems like a situation where the best players are going to play and the best players are going to produce.
Yeah. One of the interesting things that Lindy Ruff did there last year, and that was terrible for fantasy, is he did like a 1A, 1B power play situation. Where even when Dougie Hamilton was healthy, he was on the second power play there with Timo Meyer, and they had Luke Hughes up on the top unit. It was just strange stuff. I mean, do you think that Sheldon Keefe will go with a primarily like a number one power play, like 70% power play share, book it, we're good to go? Or do you think he'll kind of follow suit?
No idea. But the thing I
Mhm.
I will say about Dougie Hamilton specifically is he's a guy who shoots the puck, and arguably he overshoots the puck. Like he piles up the shots on goals.
Yep.
He piles up the goals relative to other defensemen. And in real life, it's not necessarily something that you would want on a top unit because that defenseman is more of a facilitator. You're looking to get the puck into the hands of, again, the Hughes, the Brats, Toffoli when he was there, this and that. You're not necessarily looking for Dougie Hamilton to overshoot from the point. So this is a situation where it happens on other teams too. Like the maybe the best, quote unquote, the best shooter from the back end is not on the top unit. Like Ekblad in Florida is a good example of that. Just because like he doesn't fit with the philosophy that the rest of the power play is looking to implement.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. I mean, I know there's a reason, right? But I don't know what the coach is thinking. Like when he was making that decision, I was like, this makes no sense. And plus, I drafted Dougie Hamilton in the third round. What the hell? No, this is terrible. But yeah, that is an interesting thought there. Just like he's a big time shooter, and maybe that's not what works on that power play. There is one more team I kind of want to pick your brain about here. We don't have to go through all these coaches, but I want to talk about Buffalo really quick here. And even before I get into Lindy Ruff going down to Buffalo there again, why would there be such a drastic difference between last year Buffalo and this year Buffalo? Like those teams are drastically different, and the personnel was not that different, right? Same coaching staff, like same personnel, right? You got up and comers like Tage, Dylan Cousins, Paterka, who had a great year this year. Why would that discrepancy exist there in Buffalo?
So the reason why Buffalo fell back so hard is the same reason as Vancouver shot up the standings this season. And the reason is I don't really know. Okay, because the game plan didn't. No, I'm serious. Like
Yeah.
the strategy or the tactics, like they didn't really change. Maybe the coaches made some minor adjustments, but it's just how well the players bought in and implemented what was talked about. And again, like in hockey, you don't have a huge range of strategies or sort of tactical solutions or schemes. It's how timely you are when executing and how well you execute. And for whatever reason, like I could not have foreseen Vancouver doing what they did, and I
Right.
sort of didn't foresee Buffalo or Ottawa doing what they did. Right? It's just one of those things. They do have a group of players who are quite good. Obviously, guys like Tage Thompson, like they have a track record now. Maybe they took a step back, but perhaps they're going to bounce back, right? If you look at the shooting percentage, the IPP, like if there's an outlier season negatively, then you could say that it'll bounce back.
Yeah. Oh, damn. So that means, yeah, we all don't know. Oh my God, this is the worst case
Nobody
scenario,
knows
Jack.
anything.
Oh man,
No, nobody knows anything. That's what an analyst friend who worked at the NHL level told me. It's just that nobody knows
I
anything.
I actually love that. I think I'm gonna make that my put that on my business card for my fantasy hockey podcast. That nobody knows anything.
Yeah.
We're just happy to be here. But yeah, it was quite a stark difference there with Buffalo. Like their rush offense fell off a cliff. Like and maybe this goes to your point of yeah, the mentals, right? The what the coach is bringing to the table. Is he normalizing mistakes? Is he helping build up his players, or is he kind of tearing them down and they're looking lost out there? Guys like Jeff Skinner too. When you get relegated to the third line and you're playing 12 minutes a night, you got $9 million contract. I mean, that probably doesn't feel too good. Well, the $9 million feels good, but it's not what he's there for. So it'll be interesting. I don't know. Just real quick, what do you think Lindy Ruff will bring to that team besides sort of that fresh start? That new coach bump, as you've put it.
Well, the new coach bump is guys busting their balls to not lose their jobs.
Right.
So it's not necessarily anything specific. It's just guys trying really hard for a while, and then that wears off at a certain point. In Vancouver's case, it didn't wear off until the playoffs. In a lot of other teams' cases, it only lasts 10 or 20 games. So, again, I don't really know what to expect from Buffalo next season. I think there's a lot there, and I think they'll be perhaps in contention for kind of a wild card playoff spot if things
Mhm.
break their way. But otherwise, I don't really know.
Yeah, that's a team I'm low key excited about going into next season anyway. But yeah, I think nothing but good can probably come of Lindy Ruff going there. But hopefully, for the love of Pete, just give Tage 20 minutes a night. That is what I really want to see. I want to see full. I want him to go full Tage over there. All right, we need first line Tage, not this 18-minute garbage that Don Granado was doing. I don't know. All right, let's move on from the coaches. I would be remiss if I didn't ask you, Jack, while you're here, are there players that you are higher on than consensus, maybe coming into next season? Maybe some gems that could be, for our listeners here, some fantasy gems. I know nobody knows anything, but someone has to know something. Oh my God, is there any player that's kind of getting you a little bit excited going into next season? Just someone that might break out. Not doesn't even have to be a crazy breakout. Just a player that you're low key in on.
See, I really struggle with this because you got to give me a frame of reference. Because again, like fantasy hockey is not real
Mhm.
hockey. I think that
Right.
if there's a takeaways, it's that. So, two players who are maybe very comparable in real life are not at all similar in fantasy. So maybe like give me a few names, like few
Okay.
players that you.
So think about like what Wyatt Johnston's done this year. I think we can safely say like, yeah, he's going to be a good player in the future, probably even a better player next season, but kind of like the step that he took this past year from the year previous. Guys like Matt Boldy as well. Those are guys to me, like not huge breakouts, but they're guys that are their trajectory is on the way up. Players that you're just excited to watch, guys that get you excited about hockey, if that makes sense.
So I mean Johnson's a good one because Pavelski has really fallen off. As a 40-year-old, you're not really surprised. But Johnston now is a legit top six center for the Dallas Stars. Could step into their top power play unit without any problems, especially as a righty. If again, if Pavelski retires this offseason, then Johnston is going to be the natural player to step into the role that Pavelski is vacating. Um, I think he has more in terms of point producing. I think he's better than Stankoven. Stankoven is more of a puck carrier, a very dogged player, but perhaps doesn't have that kind of finishing touch that Johnston has. So again, two very comparable players in real life, but I think Johnson is going to be a better point producer, which obviously makes a lot of difference. Boldy was in a situation in Minnesota where like I didn't think Minnesota was very good, like just a very uneven team. But at the same time, uh, I would keep an eye more on Marco Rossi because Rossi is really going to determine how good Minnesota is next season. As if he plays, top line center or second line center is really good, then that's going to be a good team. If he gets sort of shuffled down the lineup as left winger, then the team is in trouble because they don't really have a succession plan. They don't really have that threat down the middle. So, again, you would have to do some legwork and
Yep.
watch and make up your own mind. Any other names that you want to bring up?
Yeah, what about Nikolai Ehlers? That's a player we hear a lot about, just the potential, the unfulfilled potential of Nikolai Ehlers. And he's got a new coach there now. So, I mean, to me, opportunity is really what has been lacking for Ehlers. He hasn't been given
Well,
that.
he's going to get traded probably, right? Like that's what I'm hearing from pretty much everybody. Because again, like when we talk about opportunity, here's a guy who's never gotten the opportunity that his underlying stats have suggested. Now, uh, off the top of my head, like I can't tell you how old he is, but he's like, I don't know, 26, 27. So for a player with his style, we may already have seen the best of Nick Ehlers. Like maybe he goes somewhere else and he plays top line minutes and he does really well. But when you look at the aging curve for these sort of skilled kind of high paced players, um, I don't know. Like maybe Ehlers has already put up his career high in points. So I'm actually kind of bearish on him.
Oh, dang. I hate to hear this. Yeah, actually, if he goes to a team where they feed him some minutes, I really think he's could be a point per game player. Still, but I mean, the jury's out, right? Like last year in 82 games, he had 0 power play goals. 0. Rick Bonus, what are you doing? Get this guy on the ice. It didn't make any sense, but I mean, obviously Winnipeg played amazing, so it made perfect sense. But not for fantasy. But yeah, those are players that I'm very interested in. Matt Boldy in particular and obviously Wyatt Johnston. I think for fantasy, Wyatt Johnston's performance in the playoffs is going to price him out of any kind of value come draft season. Like, because it's not a sure thing, or nothing's a sure thing, but it's still risky bisky. Like he's a young guy. He's caught lightning in a bottle. Obviously, everything looks good under the hood. On that, do you see Wyatt Johnston, what he's doing here as sustainable? Like this is a trajectory that's just going to continue up. Like his opportunity should be good, like you said, with Pavelski kind of declining there.
I mean, he's certainly on an upward trend. The fact that we're talking about him so much probably means that whatever he's doing is not sustainable, but he'll fall
Right.
back to very sort of comfortably sort of top 6 to top line production, right? Which is what you would expect from him.
Yeah, for sure. Cool, Jack. Well, we're coming up on time here. I want to respect your time, but before I let you go, I'd love to talk to you a little bit about just the mental aspect of sports. We did touch on this a little bit with the coaching there, but I read an article that you did, or just a quick little article called "How to Ruin a Player." And that just really resonated. And you've touched on a little bit about this. And I don't know, I don't want to put you on the spot here, but would you mind kind of going through that a little bit, just kind of the Coles notes of that? Because I found that so interesting, especially the part about sort of ignoring like low low frequency weaknesses and things like that.
Yeah, this was something that I kind of came up with throughout my years working player development in the Toronto Maple Leafs organization, and I just saw how certain players, quote unquote, made it and others didn't, right? So basically, everything that a player does, there is a frequency and a success rate. So, for instance, the highest frequency action any player would do is skate, right? Which is why we care so much about skating, because if you have a bad skating stride, or if your pivots are really bad, then that's a skill that you're going to use, dozens and dozens and dozens of times per shift, right? Whereas if your shot is a muffin, well, maybe it matters less because you're only shooting the puck 5 or 6 times a game, and maybe if you're a defenseman, you're not basically shooting the puck at all because you're dishing it, right? Um, so the thing is if you want a player to if you want to maximize a player's value, you're looking to really elevate their high frequency and high success rate skills. So if you have a great shooter who's kind of slow, maybe, you want to put him with players who are going to carry the puck, who have, more of a speed aspect to their game. A great example is that Pavelski, Robertson, Hintz line from a couple of years ago. Obviously, they've been broken up because Pavelski has gotten so slow that he
Yeah.
can't keep up anymore, right? And enter Wyatt Johnston, or even, now they're playing Hintz with Tyler Seguin, whatever. Um, but yeah, and whereas maybe other teams, other, less smart teams, they're going to look at a player who doesn't skate very well and say, well, you're going to play with fourth liners. The problem with that is the typical fourth liner plays dump and chase and plays more of an effort game and doesn't really play off the pass. So now you're a slow guy with good skills and a good shot, but you never have the puck. Your teammates can't do anything. They can't feed you the puck. They can't win it back for you. And now all that we're seeing is your high frequency, low success rate skill, which is your poor skate. And then there's other situations where maybe you have a player who's really good at tipping pucks, but he never gets to do it. So we don't know about that, right? Like two of the biggest
Right.
success stories in the past couple of years in terms of goal scorers were Chris Kreider and Zach Hyman. Two guys who are elite around the net in terms of tipping the puck, redirecting, picking up garbage on the back post. And those guys found themselves in ideal situations to do that and to make those skills higher frequency, right? So maybe Kreider tips, I don't know, 3 or 4 pucks a game as opposed to 1 or 2. And all of a sudden, unsurprisingly, he doubles his goal output,
Right.
right? So, whereas you got other guys who, like, they have strength that we never see. So we don't really know how good they are.
Yeah, it's a really good article, and I would recommend if you're listening here, I'll definitely put that link in the description here. It's just I just like thinking about stuff like that because it's not fantasy hockey related, it's human related, and that's part of the content that you create that I really resonate to. Like some of the stuff you do, and there's that really human element that kind of binds it all together, plus the analytics. Like so, yeah, I just really enjoy the work you're doing, my man. It's excellent stuff, and I really appreciate your time. So thank you for being here. Jack, I'd like to give you the floor just to plug or promote anything you got going on here. Where can they all find you on the socials and whatnot?
So if you're not familiar with my work, the best place to get started is to sign up for my free hockey tactics newsletter. So it's if you go on Google or whatever, just type in Jack Han hockey tactics newsletter, and it'll take you right to my Substack that you can sign up for. Otherwise, I post regularly on Twitter at JHANHKY. And then if you like what I do, I put out an annual tactics guide to the NHL with sort of fully illustrated diagrams of every team's 5-on-5 and special team systems. So again, if you think that getting an edge in fantasy hockey means understanding the game better than your opponents, then perhaps there's some value there for you.
Yeah, absolutely. And I can speak to that. Like, I was telling you offline here, but I've got the newest Hockey Tactics 2024. It's a beautiful ebook. It's awesome. I'm going to put that link in the description as well. Just an abundance of relevant information for any level of hockey enthusiast. All right. So definitely check that out. But Jack, thank you so much for your time, man. I really appreciate having you here, and hopefully we can do it again sometime.
All right. Thank you, Blake. Take care.
All right, Jack, take care. And that is all, folks. We are going to be pumping out some more content here in the next couple of days. I've got some more interviews lined up, so stay tuned for that. But that's it, everybody. Celebrate your day. Bye for now.